It's time for the Chapter and Chatter Cafe with Camden County Library District Director, Professor Jim Pasley.
Okay.
And we welcome you into another edition of the Chapter and Chatter Cafe here at the Camdenton branch of the Camden County Library District on this beautiful and somewhat interesting August that we've had. It's been probably one of the weirder August months that I've dealt with in some time. But you know what? It doesn't make any difference about the weather. The weather isn't what we're going to talk about. Today, we're going to address the 1904 World's Fair. And you think, well, what are you going to talk about in relation to history and the World's Fair? Well, you're going to find out when we discuss it with the director of the Camden County Library District, the one and only Professor Jim Pasley. Of course, we want to thank some folks up front, the great staff here, and all of the staffs at all of the libraries throughout the Camden County Library District. I want to say a big thanks to Lake TV, as well as SRG Financial Advisors. I'm KB, you may know that, you may not, and who cares, right? The guy that we really want to focus on today is our good friend, Professor Jim Pasley. We're going to talk a little library activity, some of the things you've got going on. Even though the kids are going back to school, the library is still a great place to bring the kids. They've got some programs for not only the kids, but adults as well, and we'll talk about it as we progress through the hour. We thank you for joining us, and now let's take the opportunity to turn it over to my good friend and colleague of sorts, the one and only Professor Jim Pasley. Good morning, sir.
How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm just happy to be here.
You know, I was reading through our notes that we're going to use here, and I can see where something like a World's Fair is just so amazing and so important, and all of the things that it provided. Sure, it's a great opportunity for families to go and enjoy the food that we talk about. Of course, the State Fair happening here recently up in Sedalia. But, you know, the rides and all the things that come with a fair, we typically think of food and rides and exhibits and things, but this was really a huge gathering place for millions of people.
Absolutely.
To learn about not only what was going on with the fair and the fun, but technology. And getting together and sharing ideas and bringing different cultures together to experience something that was incredible. And I know this thing took a little time to get off the ground. They had some big plans, and they spent money, and lots of money, as a matter of fact, to make this thing happen. And I'm curious, as we get into this, if we could maybe discuss the funding a little bit, because you know, you talk about the Olympics that basically have wrapped up for the year, or for the 4-year period between the 2020 Olympics, and then we've got the 2028 coming up in Los Angeles. But this is something that's just really fascinating on so many levels, so many aspects. Heck, they even made a movie, Meet Me in St. Louis, which was directly related to the 1904 World's Fair, Judy Garland.
Right.
And it was so amazing. And as I said, just reading through these notes, it was phenomenal to learn about the history of this event and what it meant at that particular time.
And hard to believe it happened right here in Missouri.
Right,
you know?
yeah.
And you mentioned the Olympics. A lot of people don't realize, and we'll talk about it, they held the 1904 Olympics at the same time at the fair.
Right.
So, yeah, we'll have some interesting little tidbits about that, too.
And you mentioned that. We look at the Olympics traditionally as we would see them,
right,
you know, over a couple of weeks with qualifying and then finally getting down to the various medal matches and things like that. The U.S. women took the gold in soccer this year.
Yeah.
The men took the gold in basketball. And I think those were kind of things that maybe we had expected to happen. However, the Olympics during the World's Fair back in 1904, that was a quick one.
That was a quick one.
A very quick one.
Yeah, and it was kind of interesting. You know, you talk about the money and all. Chicago wanted to have the Olympics at the same time that the World's Fair was going to take place.
Right.
And the two cities got together and talked about it. Well, we're going to be competing for guests to come. Mm-hmm. And so Chicago said, well, shoot, if you're having a World's Fair, why don't you just take the Olympics? And that's really how it wound up there.
And that makes all the sense in the world. Obviously, I guess there was some give and take in there.
Right.
How did Chicago benefit from that? Did St. Louis eventually give something up down the road?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, they knew that down the road they'd hold another one of these World's Fairs, and sure enough, they did in Chicago.
Very good.
And one thing I wanted to say, you know, you talk about what a eye opener this thing was. My grandmother attended this fair, and she lived in a little town called Ladonia, Missouri. It's up north, and she rode in a buckboard to get there. Okay, and so think what it was like for her and most rural Missourians to go to this fair, where they go to this big city and people have automobiles and streetcars and all of this. It was, like, wow. And there's all kinds of technology being just, demonstrated and all. And I remember I asked her, I said, what was the coolest thing you saw when you were there? And she said, Geronimo. I said, what? Kind of put it in perspective just how old Granny was, Yeah,
Right.
She said that was one of the number one attractions, was you got to see Geronimo. And so, I think another big thing was the transition from the horse and buggy age into the age of automobiles and planes and everything else. They're literally on that pivot point. And so what an amazing experience for them to go and see this thing. It had a gigantic Ferris wheel, and they were saying how literally millions of people came to get on the Ferris wheel because they'd never been that high up. And it was like, wow, look at this.
Well, and you mentioned the Ferris wheel, how that was constructed and what it took in order to make that happen.
Right.
It was a very marvelous feat at that particular time, because you think about the size of this particular Ferris wheel and everything that had to go into building it.
Right.
And did we have the resources necessary? Did we have the technology necessary to make it happen? Well, yeah. And, like a lot of things, I think in the early stages, when you were still using a lot of hand tools.
Right.
We didn't have any place to plug in a drill.
Manual labor, buddy.
Yeah.
A lot of it.
A lot of machinery that they didn't have, that we have, the luxury of being privy to now. But it's just, it's amazing everything that went into that, the amount of money spent, the amount of structures that were built, the amount of technology. You talk about things that were brought in from all the other states and other countries, but imagine all the things that were taken away.
Oh, absolutely.
And how that flourished in these other countries, other states, and really led to, I guess, maybe some sort of a technological revolution.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And what really piqued my interest, like I said, was that just the photographs, and we've got a lot of them that we're going to be showing you today, and it's kind of interesting. Just the folks that came in here in the audience today, we've given them some handouts so they can see the detail on some of these things. It just blow your mind. But this thing started in April of 1904, and it had two names. It was the St. Louis World's Fair, but it was also called the Louisiana Purchase Exposition. You have to understand, that we were literally the gateway to the West. We're a jumping off point. And a lot of people that came to Missouri, it was the first time they'd come to the fair, but they thought, we're going out into the wilderness. And that's kind of what happened when they went to build this fair to begin with. It sat on the site where modern day Forest Park is. And those of you that are familiar with St. Louis. And basically, it was 1,200 acres. 1,200 acres, and most of it was swamp and just typical Missouri brush land and all of that, so they had to clear all that land, and they built 1,500 buildings for this thing. 1,500 buildings. So this is no small undertaking. They had nearly 20 million people show up. 20 million people in 1904, that's just unheard of. It's staggering. So people came in by river, they came in by rail. It was an unbelievable, just an event, if you will. And I often think, if you could go back in time, wouldn't you love to be there? Wouldn't you love to go and just walk down the main drag in the middle of the fair and see all this stuff? It was just unbelievable. Now, what's interesting is that you bring up a great point in that a ton of money was spent, but when the fair was over, they just demolished it. They took it all down. There's very little left. Those of you familiar with St. Louis, the Art Museum, that was there, you know, and Art Hill there. It's kind of interesting. They had a big slide in front of Art Hill, and a guy had elephants, and the elephants would slide down the slide and land in the big lake there where you can rent the little boats. I would have paid to see that. I mean, you know. And then the other thing is they had a lot of exhibits that basically kicked off our St. Louis Zoo. The one thing that remains from the fair was the aviary. And those of you who've been to the St. Louis Zoo, it's a big cage with a walkway through it with a cage on it. So you're literally, the birds can fly all around inside of there, and you walk through a tunnel made out of another cage. Mm-hmm. That was built in 1904. And again, you're doing this without, you know, the benefit of hydraulics and, you know, Fabic Caterpillar and all this. I mean, it was mainly just manual labor that went into all of these things. So quite a deal, to say the least. And, you know, here's one of the pictures of opening day, and you can see how many people are here already, you know, just waiting to get in and see this thing.
I like all the top hats.
Oh, absolutely. You know, and that's, you know, there's another thing, you know, I'd love to go back to those days, you know, the guys with the coats with the tails and the top hat, you know, everybody dressed pretty cool, you know, yeah, you know. Now, St. Louisans and travelers came literally from everywhere. I mean, it was a worldwide event. There were people that traveled from Europe just to see this thing. And a lot of people were real interested to see what we were doing, because at that time we were leading the world in technology, all kinds of new gadgets and everything else, and so everybody wanted to see what the latest was. So, you know, it had all kinds of different attractions for different people. Now, there were exhibits from 50 different foreign countries. Now, I think that's interesting. He had 50 foreign countries, and we only had 45 states at the time. So, you know, we had 43 of the 45 states had exhibits at this same fair. And so they had something called the Festival Hall in the center of this whole area where the states had their exhibits, and it overlooked what they called the Great Basin. And again, if you go to Forest Park today, there's a lake right in the middle of it. And that was the Great Basin, that big, right at the bottom of the hill where the Art Museum was. Now, around that one festival hall, there were 8 other palaces that they had built. So, I mean, this is a huge, huge thing, all right? Now, of course, it offered a lot more lofty, noble ideas when you went there. And you had all kinds of cultural things, entertainment things. The arcade was known as the Pike, okay? And here again, this is another great example. And you can imagine, these are temporary structures, all right? Which I thought was kind of interesting in itself. They're paper mache, guys. Yeah, look at those buildings. It's paper mache buildings. But, you know, it's just staggering to me. Where would we get the artisans today to build something like this, you know? I mean, it's just beyond comprehension.
I would think weather would obviously play a huge factor in this. What if it rained, as I'm sure it did?
It's interesting. The stuff that they called it, the stuff that they made it out of, it was called staff. Mm-hmm. And staff was a mixture of plaster of Paris and hemp, of all things.
Well,
yeah, and hemp was one of our #1 products here in Missouri. We grew it to ship back east to make ropes for all the sailing ships and all. So a mixture of plaster of Paris and hemp, bingo, there it is. So it must have been pretty sturdy stuff to be able to build structures like this.
Similar to what the Egyptians used when they were making the bricks for the pyramids.
Yeah.
I mean,
they
used the straw and the clay.
Right. Yeah. So
kind of a mixture that would keep it all together.
The ingenuity just blows my mind. Now, the Pike was considered the carnival side of the fair. And visitors there could go to all kinds of different things. And it was typical, you know, now I'm dating myself, Ed Sullivan kind of thing, you know. Those of you who know Ed Sullivan, but yeah,
really
it was like,
shoe.
yeah, you're right. It was the carnival side, and they had things like contortionists. It'd be like America's Got Talent. There, now I brought myself into this century.
There you go.
But they had things like reenactments of the Boer War. You know, they hold a reenactment with these guys shooting blank guns at one another and everything. Strange deal here. babies in incubators. They had a whole building filled with incubators with newborn babies in them. And I thought, what in the world? Well, that was a big thing. There were people that went around and toured the country with babies in incubators. And you could pay admission and you could go in and hold a baby. I got nothing.
I love holding babies.
Well, yeah, but I thought, well, that's just a bizarre kind of entertainment. But
Hold 3 babies for a nickel.
yeah, yeah. So there you go. Special today only, They had something you'd been happy to see, the Dancing Girls of Madrid.
Oh, certainly.
Yes, I figured that was up your alley. You had Jim Key, the educated horse. Now, what the horse did, I don't know, but, must have been a smart horse,
Maybe
right?
they did math problems and he would...
Yes, 3. Yeah, there you go. I've seen that horse, right? You had Hagenbeck's Zoological Paradise and Animal Circus, and that's the one that had the elephant water slide. You could go and watch elephants slide down this big slide and splash into the Grand Basin.
How much farther did they slide once they were off the actual
boy,
slide? Because the momentum...
Yes,
Did they have like a net to catch them?
Like a big splash for sure.
Did you just get the heck out of the way?
Yeah, you don't want to be sitting at the bottom of the slide when the elephants are coming, right? And then another thing that they had was they had this Ferris wheel that you talked about, this massive Ferris wheel. Now, again, what you need to take into consideration is each one of those cars is the same size as a rail car. It's a railroad car is what it is. And this thing, huge, 265 feet above the fair, and you had this huge view of the whole fair from up there. Each of the 36 cars that was on this thing held 60 people. So think about the last fair you went to with the Ferris wheel. This is the mother of all Ferris wheels, right? Held 60 people. 3 million people bought tickets to ride this thing. And it was so popular that people even made arrangements to get married on one of the cars. And they put a piano in one. They set it up with a bar and a piano, and people got married riding the Ferris wheel. It was about a 15-minute ride. And so the music would play, and ta-da, here comes the bride. So isn't that a neat legacy?
So you're saying that if this thing was filled to capacity, it would hold almost 1,300 people?
Yes.
For one
15-minute ride.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, unbelievable, isn't it? Yeah. Now, what I thought was interesting is, what do you do with something like that when the fair is over? That's a big hunk of steel right there. And so basically, they dismantled it when it was done, and they said, hey, it's for sale. Well, there weren't any buyers because it would cost too much to ship the components back east. Somebody wanted to buy it and put it at Coney Island, but they said we can build another one for what it cost to ship this thing. They got rid of most of the steel, but the axle on this thing weighed 70 tons. 70-ton axle. It was the largest piece of steel forged in the United States at that time. Now, what do you do with a 70-ton axle when the fair is over? And for years, big paperweight.
Yeah.
And for years, people tried to figure out, what are we going to do with this thing? And it just kind of disappeared. It fell out of the limelight, and people didn't know until 1943, when a guy who was working on dismantling this thing, he was 82 years old in 1943, he said, oh, that thing, he said, we dug a big hole and it's buried on the golf course at Forest Park. So if you're playing on the golf course at Forest Park, somewhere underneath there is a 70-ton axle from the old Ferris wheel. Yeah, so, go figure, right? Now, the whole story behind the construction of this Louisiana Purchase Exposition, the fair, is one where you think, good grief, what did it take? What kind of people did it take to make this happen? Can you imagine coming in every day and trying to piece this thing together? It had to be like ants out there putting this gigantic exposition together. It was highly orchestrated, as you can imagine, having to have construction managers and everything that went into this to make it all happen, providing the electricity, you name it. They had civic planners. They had literally an army of laborers because everything was done with labor back then. 10,000 workers. There were 10,000 people involved in building all this stuff. And like I say, the first thing they had to do is clear 1,200 acres of land. And it was swamps and just brush all through there, all through Forest Park and into Clayton, if those of you that are familiar with St. Louis, okay? And, you know, they had buildings and waterways and gardens and streets. All of it had to be built by hand. Unbelievable. Now, people came to this thing for a lot of reasons. You know, at first they were just, it was a marvel just seeing all of the different things that were there. But one of the strangest things that they had is they actually had, for lack of a better word, a human zoo. There was a whole section where you got to go see natives from different countries. Yeah, and you know, think about
how well would that go over today?
Politically correct, right?
That's right.
And so you had, you know, you had pygmies, and you had American Indians, and you had people from the Philippines. I mean, it was unbelievable, you know. And basically, they came from the Far East, from South America, and basically you could wander along just like a zoo and see all of these people in these different displays. Now, one of the things that you have to think about. We had just won a war in the Philippines, and it was interesting because nobody knew anything about the Philippines. There was a push after the war to give the Filipinos full citizenship rights, and there was a big fight going on and saying, last thing we need is to bring in a couple of million immigrants. Well, think of the impact that would have on a country, okay? So basically, nobody knew what a Filipino looked like. So the fair said, well, let's bring some in. Mm-hmm. And so they had them there so you could just see what they were. And it was very racist, if you will, because the whole idea is they had them come in their native garb and made it, you know, had everybody see how primitive they are compared to where we are.
I was going to say, do you think it was more of an opportunity for people to see how other cultures lived, how they existed, what they wore? Take an opportunity to find out more about their lifestyle, you know, what they ate, what they did to make a living?
No.
No.
It was more to show how advanced our civilization is compared to all the rest of the heathens worldwide.
I see. Well,
yeah,
there you go.
And so, you know...
We'll go back to your original point about the
yes,
racist aspect.
It was a little
right?
controversial, to say the least, but it didn't stop everybody from being sure to get a ticket to go see all the different...
Well, it's like anything else. When you bring in something or someone unique, everyone flocks to it. They want to see what
absolutely.
it's all about. They want to learn more about it. They just
right.
get an opportunity maybe to snap a photo, which they couldn't do there
right.
at the time because
right.
they didn't have their Polaroids
right.
with them.
Right.
But
you know, it was an opportunity to see a real live pygmy.
There you go.
You know, that's not going to happen every day, right?
No.
Now, what I thought was interesting as well, the landscape of this place. Look at this. Bear in mind, all these buildings here are paper mache. And you can see the Ferris wheel in the background there. I mean, this canal, everything was built for this fair.
But look at the detail.
Oh, it's unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. And don't you wish that would have all stayed? Wouldn't that have been something if they'd have built that permanent? I mean, it's just beyond comprehension to me. And the detail and the workmanship, good grief.
Well, it's similar to the Olympics because a lot of times they build particular structures, stadiums, certain facilities for certain events, and they have absolutely no use for them when the Olympics are over.
Right.
So they either sit there or they demolish them.
Right.
And considering the amount of money they spent,
yeah,
it almost breaks your heart to
It
see something
does.
like that.
It
And I would
absolutely
imagine
does.
the laborers that were a part of assembling all of this
Yeah.
looked at it and thought, well,
yeah, you know how much time I spent doing that? Yeah.
there's
Down it went.
how many every days, weeks, months, years of my life I'll never get back.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Now, so bottom line is, it had to be just blow your mind. You can imagine my grandmother coming in from Ladonia, Missouri, to that. Mm-hmm. You're thinking, wow, you know, I mean, unbelievable. Now, they also had concession stands. It's a fair, right? And at the concession stands, all along through the fairground, you could see all kinds of new products, new labor-saving devices, all kinds of different things to eat and try. You know, that ice cream cone that started there. There was a fellow selling hot tea, and it was in the summertime. It was 94 degrees, and hot tea wasn't selling very well. So he gets this brilliant idea that he'd take and dump a bunch of ice in his big vat of tea, and iced tea started there as well. Yeah, you know.
And thank God for that.
Yes, exactly, you know. But, you know, I can just see him standing there and said, I haven't sold a single cup of hot tea today, you know. Bingo. And the rest, as they say, is history. But one of the interesting things is like I say, there were shoe manufacturers and automotive companies and just you name it, all sorts of different things were out there. That previous slide, go back to the previous one, I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. This is the Underwood typewriter. Again, this is just their little display to show the latest technology, typewriters, you know. And I know you all sitting there thinking, what's a typewriter, right? Yeah, you know, and you know, some of you know, right? Yeah, yeah. But, you know, look at the detail just on that little building. You know, all the stained glass, everything, just to demonstrate what a typewriter was, you know. And so every one of these had, you know, down these rows were all kinds of different new labor-saving devices, products, you name it, there it was. Now, like I say, now you can go to the next slide for me. Then you had the big manufacturers. Here's Alice Chalmers' exhibit in the Palace of Machinery. And you had Ironworks and Crocker Wheeler and Doble Abner, Harrison Foundry, General Electric, Westinghouse, and you can see they brought in some big heavy-duty stuff here. And again, people were fascinated. Bear in mind, you've got people coming from all over the world and seeing this massive technology, the machines, what we were able to do to really showcase our manufacturing capabilities in the United States. And bear in mind, this is 1904. This is prior to World War I. And when the war breaks out, this is the kind of thing that people are going to say, wow, we need to get a hold of the U.S. because these guys have it going on as far as building things, technology, etc. And in essence, we became Walmart. That's where we really had our big kickoff. Was World War I, we made a fortune, and we'd sell to anybody. You know, the warring powers in Europe, we'd sell them whatever they needed, and we had the technology to make everything from weapons to uniforms to shoes to hats, it didn't matter. We had all this technology and the ability to mass produce things. And this was a great showcase, just basically giving a tease as to what's to come. You know, so I thought that was pretty cool, you know. Now, like I said, this is the fair itself going on, but there was a discussion about the Olympics. What are we going to do? Chicago wanted to have it. You can see how many people are being drawn to this thing. So they decided to have the Olympic Games at the same time while they're doing the 1904 World's Fair. And it was nearly all held right there on the grounds. There was a stadium over at Washington University where they held some of the events. But this, I thought, was just a fascinating aspect of this whole thing. They took place from August 29th to September 3rd. Like I say, the stadium that they had then was over at Washington University, and I'm not that familiar with it. I don't know if that stadium still stands or not.
Francis Field, I think it used to be the home to the St. Louis Stars, which were a professional soccer team.
Okay, okay, yeah, some of those stadiums survive. Like I saw where at LA, when the next Olympics comes, they're going to be using the Coliseum. And that was built in the 30s, I believe. You know, so again, kind of an interesting deal. It didn't go totally to waste, but there's the Olympic events. These just blew my mind. All right, we just watched the Olympics. Break dancing. I thought everybody's going, well, that's weird. Well, let me help you out here with some weird ones, okay? Because these used to be Olympic events. The one I thought was most fascinating was the dive for distance. Dive for distance. And I thought, what, do they put you up on top of a mountain, see how far out you can jump and hit? No. You stood at the edge of the pool, all right? And feet together, arms at your side, and what you did is you dive into the water and float face down, and see how far out you could go before you stopped moving. Nope, no paddling, no nothing, just jump and flat, and how far did you go? It's all with the push-off, right? I know, and the farthest distance wins.
Riveting.
Yes, riveting. Now, believe it or not, it was the first and the last time that they held that event.
I can understand
It's
why.
Kind of like the breakdancing. I don't think we're going to see that one again either. But they had a grand total of 5 divers involved in the distance dive.
At least it didn't last a long time.
Well, yeah, and so these guys dove in, did their thing, and a fellow by the name of William Dickey. And here he is, William Dickey, quite the athlete. You look at that form, look at that guy. I mean,
I like the swimsuit.
the swimsuit helps too,
Is that a
yes.
one-piece, you think?
Yeah, I don't know if it is or not,
They call it like a unitard?
Yeah,
uniform of a swimsuit?
They pulled this guy out of a bar down on, Broadway and said, "Hey, dude, come on, you look like you can float, right?" And so there he goes. And he won the gold medal, 62 feet, 6 inches. That's a pretty good deal, We're all going to have to try it. We all live at the lake now, so this weekend I want everybody to see, it'd be great fun at the dock with all your grandkids and everybody. Do the distance dive to see who wins, right? What the heck, it's worth a shot, right? So they claim that Mr. Dickey was the best, that he made the best dive ever in the Western Territories. So, he's famous. Went down in history, I guess, And see, think about that. Here we are, 120 years later? Ta-da, he's famous, right? We made him famous, so there you go.
Everybody's got to be famous for something.
Yes,
I guess, right?
my hero.
Right.
Yes. Now, there's
I
a better...
modeled my life after William Dickey.
Yes, I can tell.
Thank you so much. Wasn't hard to do.
No, but he's my kind of guy. He's an inspiration. So then I thought, well, what other bizarre things happened at this Olympics, okay? And I thought, well, surely these guys had a marathon. You always have a marathon at the Olympics, right? And they did. And there was a fellow by the name of Fred Lors, okay? Now, Fred Lors, interesting character. He enters into this deal, and there were only like 28, 29 of these guys in the whole competition. Now you see hundreds of them running a marathon, but there are like 28 of them. And Mr. Lors shows up at the finish line like 25 minutes before everybody else. And he's not hardly sweating. And everybody's, hey, here he comes, crosses the finish line. Everybody's cheering, thinks it's wonderful, my God, he set a world record and all. And they're having him come over to put the gold medal around his neck. And one of the fans walks up and said, "You might want to hold off on that. I saw him riding in a cab earlier." Now, cab back then was, horse and buggy, but it was taxis that would get you from point A to point B. Well, as it turns out, this guy ran about 3 miles of his marathon, his 26 miles, 28 miles, yeah. So he ran 3 miles. Then he hailed a cab, hopped in it, and rode to within a mile of the finish line. Probably sat there and had a beer and a cigarette while he was waiting. And he thought, that's about enough time. Hops out of the cab, runs the extra, 2 miles, finishes, everybody cheering, huzzah. So again, he's famous too, yeah.
They didn't have cameras in the sense that they were covering the event
No.
on a major television network.
Right.
Didn't have drones.
Right.
Didn't have people with cell phones that had cameras on them. So
Yeah,
who really knows?
that's right,
Although I would imagine at some point people were saying, well, I never saw the guy pass me.
Yeah.
Run by me. I'm standing
Yeah.
here, like you have the people
Right.
that hold out the cups of water for
Right.
the marathon runners.
Yeah.
Those people never saw the guy.
But bear in mind, the 26 miles they're running, it's out through the brush, cornfields.
Oh, sure.
I mean, it's out, it's 26 miles, so they're out there, in the hinterland, like places like out by Creve Coeur, My goodness, And so they would run along these dirt roads. Nobody really paid attention, and sure enough, I paid a lot more attention to the Olympics this time. I was watching them. I thought, there's a lot of, they've got trains and everything running through Paris, you know, you got to watch those guys. Might hop a ride. Me, he's my kind of guy. I only believe you should run if you're being chased.
That's
you know?
right.
So yeah, so he did quite well. Now the interesting thing is when they disqualified him. Now, so who is the winner? All right, who gets the gold medal? Well, sure enough, you know, about a half an hour later, here comes this poor sap. He looks like death warmed over. He's in terrible shape. Pale as can be. He can barely, he's just staggering trying to get across the finish line. And his name was Thomas Hicks. Now, Thomas, about halfway through the race, he collapses. He's done. He's finished. He can't go any further. And his coach is there. And his coach runs up to him and says, "You got to do this. You've got to keep going." And so it's the first example, really the first case they ever had of using performance-enhancing drugs in the Olympics.
So what did he give him?
And today they still have this on the banned drugs list. They gave him strychnine, rat poison. Yes. Here, this will make you feel better. Now, I had to look into this, and sure enough, in small doses, strychnine gives you a little rush, okay, an adrenaline rush. And so what they did is they took 2 raw eggs and a good dose of strychnine and stirred it up in a cup and had him wolf it down. And he got up, and off he goes, okay. Now, strychnine, bear in mind, you know, it'll make you anemic as all get out. So he's white as a ghost, struggling along, you know, trying to finish. And so, sure enough, he gets to within about a mile of the finish. Down he goes again. And the coach again is like, "We've got to do something to keep this guy up and running." And so what they did is they modified it slightly. They turned around, more egg whites, you know, mixed up the eggs, a little more strychnine, a little bigger dose this time, and they put brandy in it. So brandy, strychnine, and eggs. Stirred it up. Drink this. Sure enough, Kazango, he pops up and finishes the race and wins the gold medal. Now, I encourage you, if you can research this, pull up a picture of Mr. Hicks. I mean, he looks like he died 12 miles back,
Right.
But he made it, and he got the gold medal. So,
How long did he live after the race?
well, I don't know. Yes, awarded posthumously.
Yes.
Yes. So anyhow, he won it with a time of 3 hours and 28 minutes. It was the slowest time in Olympic history for a marathon. But, you know, I think it's a miracle he survived it. The other thing is like you said, they didn't have all this, you know, they're running out in a rural area. They had one water station halfway through. 13 miles in, there was a well.
That's about the time I think I need a drink right now.
Yes, exactly. So, again, I just found this fascinating.
I detect a hint of strychnine.
There you go. Yeah. So you know, it just amazes me when you go back and look at some of these things. And they had things like the tug of war was a big event. You know, just if you go back and look at the events they had back then versus now, unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. They did all the gymnastics, no pads. No, when you did your loop-de-loop and landed, no, you're just landing on the ground. You know, you did a high jump, you just flat on your back. You know, ta-da. You know, so yeah, it's pretty humorous when you go back and look at some of these things.
I think it would be the Olympics considered a little bit of a medical marvel that they didn't have more compound fractures.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, and they probably did.
Yeah.
You know, I think they said that on the marathon there were 6 of them finished out of 28. So there you go.
The strychnine pretty much off the other ones.
Well, you know, some coaches are a little more, you know, give him a little more and maybe he'll go a little faster. You know, yeah. There's a fine, you know, a balance there.
Right.
So back to the fair itself. The St. Louis Fair debuted April 30th of 1904, and it lasted for 7 months. It ended December the 1st. And basically, like I say, it had 1,500 buildings made from this stuff called staff. It was plaster of Paris and hemp. And it was inexpensive to use it, but it was temporary. It just didn't last, you know. I mean, like you said, you can see the rain we've had the last few days. Probably buildings had some touch-ups on occasions, right? Now,
Or collapsed entirely.
right, or collapsed entirely, yeah. Basically, it was, pretty amazing that the stuff did hold up. Now, there were palaces. Some of these palaces they made were literally several city blocks in size. According to the American History Museum, the Palace of Agriculture was the largest. It covered 23 acres. 23 acres under one roof. Now think about that. In 1904, that's quite an engineering feat in itself. And inside this thing, they had a dairy farm, they had a cider mill, an olive press, they had all kinds of, again, farm implements and equipment, all the latest stuff, which, again, I just find fascinating, and you can imagine probably farmers from all over the world coming to see all this latest technology, okay? Cost $15 million to fund this fair. Now, $15 million now, you'd think, well, that's nothing. But $15 million back then, wow. I mean, the average salary for people was $350 a year, and so these, $15 million for an 8-day affair, that was something.
Do you know how they funded this? I mean, where did they get this money from?
Primarily through civic organizations. St. Louis contributed a ton of money to it through taxation, of course, but then the biggest amount of it came through donations through the program. You see, you had vendors. They charged the vendors to have their exhibits and everything.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, but again, you had to wonder when you're going out.
Did the
there,
government kick in any money, by the way?
No.
I didn't
No,
think so.
no,
They,
no
they
government.
they weren't in that business yet.
No,
Okay.
they aren't in that business yet.
All right.
Yeah, now you got a grant for it, and they've been fine.
Yeah,
Yes,
sure.
Yeah. Now, throughout the time the fair was open, 20 million people showed up. 20 million people. I mean, even today, if you think about it, if 20 million people showed up in St. Louis tomorrow, can you imagine the nightmare it would be logistically to just feed them and house them and transportation, everything involved? And this is in 1904, where you have cars and buggies sharing the road together, okay? Now, it was a huge success. Surprisingly, it was the only World's Fair to actually make a profit. They brought in more than the $15 million, okay? And some of the people that visited, give you an idea, Helen Keller was there. You had Thomas Edison visited. I mean, bear in mind, this whole thing is lit up. I mean, this is, again, I can't even imagine going from a farm in rural Missouri and coming to see this thing. And none other than Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt was there as well, bully, right? Bully. Now, finally, when the fair was over, the leftover buildings, like I say, prompted all kinds of city projects, and that's where we got Forest Park from. They'd cleared all the land, and now, when they take the buildings down, you've got all this open territory, 1,200 acres, and they founded Forest Park. And basically it became, the foundation for the park that's there now, with the golf course and the zoo and the aviary and all of that. The aviary becoming a big part of the new St. Louis Zoo. And again, what was the Palace of Fine Arts is the St. Louis Art Museum now. That building itself is probably the best example of what they built for that World's Fair, the architecture and the style and all. So, and again, the Great Basin where the lake is and all of that, just an absolutely fascinating piece of history. And I know we've kind of deviated from current events, but I thought let's sprinkle a little something interesting in here as well. And so that's pretty much what I have on the St. Louis Fair.
Well, there's so much that you can stop and think about. I'm sure building codes weren't anything that really applied during this particular time.
Right.
So you really didn't have any boundaries in terms of how you did things. Certainly when you were paying 10,000 laborers to help build this thing, you didn't really have to worry, I guess, too much about, paying them a lot of money. Maybe they were just happy to have jobs.
Oh, they were all happy to have a job. Yeah.
And I wonder again, based on, now here's a little comparison as far as then and now. We have employers that are struggling to get employees. I would think back in the day, these people were happy to have jobs. They showed up on a regular basis. I would imagine, you got 10,000 laborers. You're going to have the occasional sick day or maybe emergency, what have you. Somebody's wife is going into labor, whatever. Then, of course, along the way, you probably had a few of these folks injured.
Right.
Maybe just a little bit.
Drag them off and get another one.
Yeah, well, maybe at that time it wouldn't have been all that hard. Maybe people were chomping at the bit. I mean, think about the fact that you were someone that was a part of building a structure or just being a part of the whole process. And maybe you weren't the guy that won a marathon, or maybe you weren't somebody famous like Helen Keller or Thomas Edison or Theodore Roosevelt that showed up. But you were there and you were a part of it. And I guess that can kind of lead into what we're going to talk about with some of the things going on through the library. But when you put it in perspective and you look at then versus now and how we have tons and tons and tons of building codes, and think of all the environmental issues we'd have to deal with in a day and age like today, with the Environmental Protection Agency out there every 5 minutes, testing the water, making sure we didn't have any species of animals that were being upset, or
snail darters and whatever.
What have you. I mean, there is a way to connect it, as far as what we did then as opposed to how we do things now. So
it is.
In a roundabout way, like you always manage to do, we take something happening now, which is just recently the Olympics.
Right.
Do they still have World's Fairs? I haven't heard of
the
one.
The last one I'm aware of, they had one in New Orleans, but that was when my kids were young.
Yeah.
But
in 84, I was there.
84 in New Orleans? Yes, there you go. Well, see, so no, they haven't had one. Well, and here again, funding would be an interesting part of it, wouldn't it?
Sure.
And I also think one of the things that we're probably lacking now is like I say, when you look at the structures that they were able to build. You're a St. Louis boy. Bear in mind, St. Louis was like a hodgepodge of different nationalities. And so when it called on something like this to have artisans, there's a huge German community, Greek community, Italian community. Most of these people were immigrants at that time who had come to the New World.
And a lot of those communities still exist today.
Exactly. And they brought with them those trade skills that we don't have today. I mean, I think it would be a real challenge to say, build it again. We got all the pictures, build it again. And where are we going to find the people that could do that? One of the other interesting pieces here is that those of you familiar with St. Louis, if you run down along Lindell Boulevard, and I'm trying to think of the other big one, but right by Washington University, there's a subdivision there. I call it a subdivision. It's not really. It's a bunch of estates in a place called Westmoreland Place. And those homes in there are beyond comprehension. They were all built during the 1904 Olympics and the World's Fair, and they were built for the leaders of all these different nations. And it's really fascinating. I had a friend lived in that neighborhood, and we went next door to a home that was built for the Indian prime minister, and I mean there was just every one of them German styles. If you can get into that Westmoreland area and look at those homes, just absolutely fascinating, beautiful places, absolutely beautiful.
With the amount of technology that we have available to us today versus what they had back in the day, it amazes me that it seems like as we've obviously progressed through history, we've really limited ourselves to some degree because we've come up with ways to try to make things safer. How we've tried to just tell everybody that this is the way you should live your life, or this is how you should live your life. And I wonder what the overall atmosphere was around that period of time where people came in and they looked around and they said, I don't know if we really like this. I mean, it's nice to be able to come here, but do they have too many rules and regulations? Back in the day, I would imagine there were people that complained about it just like they complain about it today.
Oh, yeah.
However, the ability for these people to be able to do something on that scale is just fascinating. I mean, you think about, I wonder how something, and you made a comparison. It's like when they had the original Woodstock, and they tried to repeat it in 1999,
Didn't happen.
and it was a big cluster.
Right.
A Klosterbogen of
Yes,
sorts. Yes,
exactly.
but we look at all the things that would have to take place today, just prior to even breaking ground,
Right.
or building one structure, or talking about bringing in all these different machines and all this new technology. It's mind-boggling that they were even able to pull something like this off.
And again, when you think about the time period, they had a law that with automobiles and cars, or automobiles and wagons and horses having to interact, that was scaring all the horses. So they passed a law that you had, when you drove your car, you had to have a guy stand in front and walking ahead, letting everybody know, car coming here, everybody look out and move your horses because the car's coming. You had to have a guy walking. So having a car, it didn't move very fast. It moved as fast as the guy that's walking ahead, warning everybody that the car's coming. But when you sit there and think, you're going from literally primitive to modern, and it was all a snapshot here. It all came together right there. And I just think it was a fascinating part of Missouri history, and I just wanted to share it with everybody.
1,200 acres, 1,500 structures, 70-ton axle. I mean, just listen to those numbers.
I know.
They're staggering.
It is.
It boggles the mind that, again, people were able to comprehend and come together. And you think about the amount of people necessary just to organize it all.
Oh.
And
yeah.
then, the trickle-down theory where it gets bigger and bigger, you eventually get down to the laborers.
Right.
And, what they were supposed to do and how they were supposed to do it, and some sort of a timetable, a schedule. Well, they kind of blew that all out of the water to begin with,
Yeah.
because I don't think they understood and realized the magnitude of what it was they were doing at the time. And maybe in their minds they conceived it as a project we could start here and be done around here. But, you talk about the land itself, swampland, there was probably a lot of issues with that. And even during the fair, there were things that they had to constantly tend to. And that in itself, again, with all of that going on, all those people, 20 million people saw this thing over the 8-month period that it took place.
Fresh water and food for 20 million people.
Yeah.
Think about that, the logistics just in that. Unbelievable.
How about just trying to find a bathroom?
Yeah. There you go. Yeah.
Well, it kind of comes back around to some things that we're going to talk about today involving the Camden County Library District. And I had mentioned the fact that we were talking about maybe people that didn't get the notoriety. They weren't a contortionist. They weren't some sort of a celebrity like a Helen Keller. But there were a lot of people involved in the process. And so if you at some point might be interested, let me tell you about something that I think is just huge when we talk about finding out more about your family, the family history. And if you've ever wondered about maybe somebody in the family that competed, somebody in the family that was a part of the building process, took place on whatever level they were involved with this thing, it kind of brings you back around to discovering your roots, and that's something that they're going to do through the Camden County Library District on Monday, September the 9th at 9 a.m. You'll have the opportunity to explore your family's roots with Ancestry and Heritage Quest, which I think is phenomenal. You never know who or what you might find out about your family. And I've often wondered, I mean, growing up in and around the St. Louis area, how many of my family members, or maybe even your family members, you've got a lot of history in the Lou there as well. But this is something that's extremely fascinating, and you can really learn a lot. And I think as you learn about your family and where they ended up and did what they did, obviously certain things happened along the way, world wars, depressions, and how your family handled it, what they did, how they made a living, how they eked themselves and the rest of the family members through during this process as well. And it's fascinating. Again, mark it on your calendar, Monday, September 9th, 9 a.m., and you can explore exactly what it was that your family did. And I think that this is certainly very fascinating. But is this something that we're going to do here on location, right here at the Camden County Library District Camdenton branch? So that's one thing that you can look forward to. Also, parents, if you've got kids who aren't enrolled in school yet, you'd like them to participate in the 1,000 Books Before Kindergarten Challenge starting September 1st, 2024. 1,000 books before kindergarten. That is a feat in itself.
Yes, it is.
But it's not that you have to sit down and put 1,000 books in front of a kid and get them to read all 1,000 books. Absolutely not. This can be something that maybe grandma or grandpa shares with the child if they like to read to them, moms, dads, however this works. And now any book your child reads counts. And yes, for those who have their favorites, you can count these reads more than once. If you've got Clifford the Big Red Dog, somebody's into that book, read it as many times as you like. Read it to them. Maybe at some point you can teach them how to read. They can start reading it. You can even count books, as I said, that are read to your child at the library, story times, by grandparents, older siblings, audiobooks, caregivers, more, whatever you'd like to do. And then come into one of the libraries to pick up your first reading log to get started with all of this. As you and your child complete the reading logs, return them to the library to earn a brag tag, which is kind of nice for kids. Every kid loves a brag tag.
You bet.
Lets other kids know that, hey, we're doing cool stuff and learning about, well, whatever it might be. If it's something simple, if it's something a little bit more complicated. And once your child has completed all 10 levels, what happens is they'll receive a certificate of achievement and have their picture taken and added to the wall, the newly added bragging wall that they have there. Where is that located? Somewhere close by here? Okay, very good. So you can come by and maybe see some of the pictures that are already on there, and it will encourage your child to do well, because every kid likes to, have their picture or brag tag, things like that. These
Read
are
a
all
book
great.
to them every night. It doesn't take long to add it all up.
Absolutely. If you'd
so-
like more information, obviously go to www.ccld.us, Camden County Library District.us, just the letters, ccld.us, to chat with the folks, find out more, or you can just stop by your local Camden County Library District branch and find out more about what's going on. Grandparents' Day is celebrated nationally on the second Sunday of September each year, and they invite grandparents and their children to join us for a story time on Wednesday, September the 4th, 2024 at 11 a.m. at the Camdenton Library, here again at this particular branch that we broadcast live from, on, to. We'll read stories, sing songs, make a special craft for grandparents, and share donuts, juice, and coffee. Donuts. I'm there.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? Please pre-register for the event by calling them at 573-346-5954 or visit the website again, the www.ccld.us, and click on their calendar of events. It'll get you everything you need. Coming up, local author Jeanette Pickering will be at the Stoutland Library on Tuesday, September the 17th, starting at 6:15 in the evening. And they invite you to come out and meet her and stay for an informal chat where Jeanette will discuss her life and how it has related to her writing process. That sounds rather interesting. If you've got any writers in your family or people that may be interested in something like that, it would be good to get some inside information from someone who's actually been involved in writing. Some people do it different ways, but you can certainly find out more about how Jeanette has done it and get some up close and personal information. Talk to her. She can probably tell you some tips and tricks about writing that you may not have known about. Also, life is a journey that begins and ends with family. Don't get caught unprepared. This is something that a lot of us don't think about until we get to a certain age. I'm one of those people because we don't think about dying. We think about living. And it's not bad to think about it, and it's certainly not bad to plan it out and have it ready to go, because if you're someone who has dealt with this issue before, someone passes away and all of your stuff has to go through probate, forget it. That's a long, arduous process. It certainly is. So the Camdenton Library, again, the location on Friday, September the 20th from 4 to 6 to discuss trusts, wills, powers of attorney, asset inventory, and more. You can do that with a local lawyer. Her name is Deidre O'Donnell, and Deidre is an estate planning lawyer and has been a lawyer in Camden County for like 28 years. She's got the experience in all of these things I mentioned: estate planning, probate, family law, criminal defense. She and her team at O'Donnell Law Center implement a streamlined estate planning process that helps their clients understand and receive the information they need to start and finish a comprehensive and highly personalized estate plan. This isn't one of those cookie cutter things. And so often you hear about programs that are available online or you call a 1-800 number and they take care of it that way. This is a good opportunity for you to sit down and really get the information necessary to plan for, maybe your passing or someone else. You assist them. That way, when it does happen, having to deal with the grief of the situation is overwhelming enough. Having to deal with someone's assets, how they'll be distributed, all the things you need to know, get that all wrapped up ahead of time. And that is one less issue that you'll have to deal with. It certainly is. It is about 9:13 here this morning, and we've had a great hour talking about the World's Fair. We've had a great hour talking about some of the programs that are coming up at your Camden County Library District. All of these great assets that are available. In addition to the programs we talk about, as always, I implore you to explore the 6 branches of the Camden County Library District. Find out what's available within the doors of the library. You would be surprised. I know just right here alone, there's so much cool stuff, so many great resources, and a lot of helpful individuals. We have to talk about the great staffs that you have at all of these libraries.
We do.
And there's some amazing people, a wealth of information to be found, but a wealth of great people to help you explore and find out more about that information and how you can access it for whatever it is that you're looking for. No topic too crazy.
If you're interested in the topic today, we've had all 6 libraries have pulled materials on St. Louis and the World's Fair and all kinds of interesting information there. So it's waiting for you. All you got to do is walk in the door and grab a book.
And to take an opportunity to check out the website again, www.ccld.us, and you can find out about dates and times, go to the calendar of events, find out what's new and exciting, and just explore your Camden County Library District Library, much like we do here at the Camden branch, and thanks to everyone that makes this possible. Lake TV, thank you. SRG Financial Advisors, thank you. Mark, Coley, thank you so much for your assistance. Vicki, all you folks for coming in like you do each and every month. We appreciate that. We're back in September, and what date is that? September the 19th. We'll be right back here for another installment of the Chapter and Chatter Cafe, and we thank you for joining us. Folks, have a great day. God bless. We'll see you in September. Make sure to explore your local library, wherever that may be.